Welcome, Meher Baba of Ahmednagar and the Aesthetics of Religious Symbolism, a series of 10 biographical talks by Dr. James Newell. It's me. This is talk number 9. We're really getting up there. We got one more, which will be next week. Not usually there's 2 weeks, but this one will be next week. This takes us up to up through the end of Meher Baba's physical life.
And that'll be on June 6th.
June 6th will be the next one, yes. At 7 p.m. right here, as long as Judy and Robin continue to.
And there's no volcanoes.
And there's no volcanoes. Yeah, if there's a volcano here, I'm leaving. So we left off last time. Those of you who were here, congratulations. Also, we did it again because we weren't able to tape it properly, so we taped it on Saturday. So some of you got 2 versions of the same talk. But we left off in both talks with Meher Baba's universal message, read out and distributed for the first time soon after his return from his final trip to the West, visiting the Meher Center in Myrtle Beach and Avatar's abode in Australia. This was, so as you'll see, what I want to say about this final period is as early as 1954, Meher Baba began sort of separating from people in a way that really was very, and I'll as we go through this, I'll mention Adi K. Rani, another of the Mandali, who by doing this, they felt that he really had helped them, because had he just, as Adi says, had he just popped off, had he just dropped the body without any warning, it would have been such a shock to them. It would have been very hard, as it was very hard for them to recover, but they felt that he kind of prepared them for it. And you were mentioning, Ira, last time, the final declaration and how important you think it is. And I think it is important. It's complex enough that we could do a whole series of talks just on the final declaration, so I'm kind of not spending a lot of time on that. However, I will say that in the context of this, the last years of his life, I do think that the final declaration was, at least in part, something that prepared people. He talked about how he's going to have to drop his body, and he's going to be attacked, and there will be all these things. And he said later that they were, I would say, symbolic. He said they were in his language, which my claim would be that his language is, if nothing, it's certainly symbolic, and maybe other things, but it's also symbolic. But rather than get into all the dense and complicated symbolism of that, I'll just say that it had to do with him dropping his body, and he kind of shocked people with this. And as he did with the New Life, he told people in the New Life that they would never see him again. They had to be prepared to never see him again. And in fact, and you can even say that that was sort of a beginning phase of this phase, where he's getting people used to the fact that he's going to be going away. In other words, leaving the physical realm, dropping his body, as they say in India, and they wouldn't see him again. So all this is sort of a preparation, because, as I've said throughout, a key part of Meher Baba's ministry, and I would call it a teaching tool, as well as, I don't think he would say there was that. It sounds a little cold to say that it's manipulative and pragmatic to say that, well, he was just, this is teaching, so he was developing affectional bonds as a teaching tool. I think he was, but it also was genuine, and he genuinely developed fond and close relationships to people. But that very aspect of his work meant that it was difficult for people to separate from him when that time, especially the ones who were in India and Mandali, the people who were very, very close to him. It became very difficult for them to separate and think about him not being there. So it seems, and I'll try to show that as we go through, that he was preparing people. In other words, part of his work was to do that. So neither of these trips to Myrtle Beach or Australia were public in the sense of everybody's welcome, like they were in earlier trips. Both restricted attendance to those who consider themselves to be followers or lovers of Meher Baba. These types of restrictions began in 1954, after Meher Baba released what he called his final declaration, and then followed that up with his clarification of the final declaration, which was in response to the alarm some of his followers felt the clarification was. And additionally, even after that, there was still people who were unsettled, so he sent out the following statement, and this is, of course, a little bit redacted. I've edited it down, but just want to get some key points in. So this is Mayor Baba's voice. There is no reason at all for any of you to worry. Baba was, Baba is, and Baba will also be eternally existence. Severance of external relations does not mean the termination of internal links. It was only for establishing the internal connection that external links, external contacts had been maintained till now. The time has now come for being bound in the chain of internal connections. Hence, external contact is no longer necessary. It is possible to establish the internal link by obeying Baba's orders. I give you all my blessings for strengthening these internal links. In other words, I'm giving you all my blessings to be able to follow my orders. I am always with you, and I am not away from you. I was, am, and will also be eternally with you, and it is for promoting this realization that I have severed external contact. This will enable all persons to realize truth by being bound to each other with eternal links. So not just bound to him, but bound to each other also through this connection to him. Oh, my lovers, I love you all. It is only because of my love for my creation that I have descended on earth. Let not your hearts be torn asunder by my declarations concerning the dropping of my body. On the contrary, accept my divine will cheerfully. You can never escape from me. Even if you try to escape from me, it is not possible to get rid of me. Therefore, have courage and be brave. So, as you can see, my feeling is that, now this is 54, we're going back and forth. Last talk was from 52 to 58, and now we're starting from 58, 59 up to the end of his life. But as a sort of a background to what's going on here, I think he started at that time. And as I say, even you could say in the new life, when he broke away from everybody and they thought they would never see him again, that he's both establishing links and cutting links at the same time. So after a lifetime of forging deeply felt affectional bonds with literally thousands of people, and I say literally because if you remember last time, there was a request that he sent out for people to, everybody who loves him, wants to obey him, to write back to him and say that they have, if they do, to say, or to say, to write back and say whether or not they have complete trust in him. And according to the sources, he got 30,000 responses. So I can't say for sure that each and every one of those 30,000 responses represented someone who felt a deep affectional bond, but I think it's a good bet to say many, many, many of them. So literally thousands of people felt this deep connection with him. And you could say, I'm saying in response to that, it seems that he began as early as 1954, or you could say even in the new life, he began a slow, deliberate, and determined process to prepare people for his death and the necessary separation from them that they would experience. So this posture of his, this sort of drawing people close but keeping them more at a distance and less intimate than they had been, was emphasized throughout the Western trip, this is 1958 trip, and throughout all subsequent Darshan programs, including the East-West Gathering. Attendees were regularly asked to expect no special attention from Baba, to neither expect nor ask for discourses, for personal interviews, nor to ask him to see to any personal problems or concern. Now, that some would say, well, that sounds cold, and yet underlining that, even that he would have to say that, is of course to say just how people felt, how close they felt to him, how many individuals had come to expect exactly that kind of intimacy, that they could bring him all of their personal problems. So literally thousands of people were regularly writing to him, contacting him and telling, asking for this, asking for explanations about this or that, or telling him about their family. I know Newell, a friend of ours, used to say that wouldn't take a test, or that his family wouldn't do anything without writing to Baba and asking what, and Vinod, you said that too, right? Your family would always be checking with Baba. And there's so many families who would would do that. So he very carefully, it's really, it's another sort of representation of the kind of integrity and sense of respecting these affectional bonds that he himself had forged, that he was very careful not to just say, okay, that's it, I can't take it anymore. He would slowly, and even when he did this, you know, and I know Vinod could tell us, and other people would tell us, even after he did that, people would still write to him, and he would still respond, and he would still, but little by little, he was getting people used to the fact that they were going to have to rely on internal links rather than these external contacts and this external helping with problems and all that. And yet, and again, I also know families who during the same period, if they didn't go to him and check with him first before somebody got married or did something like that, he would say, well, you know, why would you not check with me? So it was really an interesting dance that he did with people. So after reading the Universal Message on July 10th, 1958, that's where we stopped last time, was with the reading of the Universal Message, Meher Baba gave out this statement. My recent trip to America and Australia will remain my last visit to the West. This was one of 2 points which I made very clear during my sahavas there. And we just finished, those of us here in Myrtle Beach, just finished the 60th, today I think is the day, yeah, this morning, was when he had left to Wilmington to take a flight to the West Coast, where he stayed overnight and then went immediately to Australia to complete this tour that he was making. So that's what he's referring to here, is this event that happened 60 years ago. So this is one of my 2 points which I made very clear during my sahavas there, meaning here and Australia. So the one was that that was going to be his last trip. And the second point is also applicable to my lovers in the East, and that is that henceforth none should expect or seek from me any discourses, darshan, sahavas, or interviews. So again, he's, as soon as it really seems like a line in the sand when he puts out the universal message. And later on, during different periods, someone asked him, well, Baba, do you want to have a special message for this? And he says, I've given out the universal message. It's for everybody. It's for my lovers. It's for people who don't know anything about me. That's the last message. I don't need any more messages. So, why? He says, this is because the time for the breaking of my silence is nearer than ever before, and I must complete everything in that connection. In what connection? The connection to breaking the silence. I must complete that within 6 months from the 14th of July, 1958. And he says, I may also have to drop my body. So again, he brings up this refrain. And also throughout this period, as I'll mention again, he relies on, well, why there's so much seclusion? Well, I've got to keep doing my universal work. The breaking of my silence is very soon, and the strain of that is very tiring, and I need to have complete quiet. And so that would be and then he would drop that. There's a period when he drops it, and he has lots of darshans, and he sees a lot of people, and then, oops, he tightens it up again, and he goes back and forth. But for the most part, the trend is right up to the mid-60s, and then it gets very, very intensely more restricted until he finally dropped the body. And even then, well, you'll see, even when he's about to, he's saying the time has come, my work is done, and in retrospect, all appearances, he knew that he was going to be dropping his body. Yet everybody else is saying, oh, that means the work is done, now we can go. All the Westerners were going to come, and also Easterners, and there's going to be a big darshan program. So, this is an excerpt now in regard to this from Lord Meher. From July 1958, Meher Baba began a series of seclusions which would last on and off until the end of his life. The current seclusion begun on Monday, 14th of July. Remember, he just said this has to start 6 months from the 14th of July. This seclusion begun on Monday, 14 July 1958, was distinct from all those previously undergone. During this, what Baba called total seclusion, Baba completely severed his connection with the outside world of his lovers. All incoming and outcoming correspondence was banned. In addition, Baba kept his Merazad and Merabad Mandli completely separated from each other. No one was to step out of the limits of his or her respective areas. Even when Adi Sr., who is at those of you who know the layout in Ahmednagar. There's the Kushru Quarters, which is the trust office, and that was his family home, and Audi stayed there. Even when Audi Sr., Baba's official public secretary, was called from Ahmednagar to Merazad for some work or other, he was only to speak with Kakabaria, who was the manager at that time of the ashram, and he could not meet any of the other men or anybody else there. He'd go there, do the work, come back. From time to time, there were exceptions to this seclusion. That was the excerpt. This is me talking now. So from time to time, as I just said, there were exceptions to this seclusion rule, but more and more, as time went on, Meher Baba continued to restrict access to him and relied on regular statements about his poor health, the strain of his ongoing universal work on his health, and the imminent breaking of his silence, which all of this was inexorably leading to. In other words, his narrative to people was that he had to do the universal work because his breaking of the silence was pending, and the stress of that work was so intense that he had to stay in seclusion, and it was very difficult for him. Now, all of this, we need to remember also, we've been, it's a long series of talks. I don't know if everybody here was in the early talks, but he was a young, vibrant, by all appearances, successful Parsi student, cricket player, and then all of a sudden he has this experience and his life completely turns around, so that now, rather than focused on basically the goals of his social group, the goals of his mother particularly, and the goals of his family, suddenly he's focused on nothing but this inner experience that was a result of his encounter with Hazrat Babajan. And this completely removed any focus whatsoever from what we would call the normal world. He calls the gross physical world or illusion. He couldn't see any illusion. According to him, his experience was that he was God, he was one with God, he experienced nothing but that. And when he encountered Upasani Maharaj, the stone striking him in the forehead brought him back to a realization of the world and began to integrate him back in the world. So he says that he never lost that initial experience, but he was now able, with the help of Upasani Maharaj, to integrate that experience with the world, and as such, and also that towards the end of his stay with Upasani said to him, Merwan, you are the avatar and I salute you. So from the beginning, and this is indicated in his Huma songs and other things, he had a complete conviction in and a complete sense of this, the reality of this experience, and the importance of this experience in the sense that he now had a mission that he was duty-bound to fulfill as a result of his reintegration into illusion with other souls that he saw as being bound by illusion. So this is, from the point of view of perfection, he's completed basically the work. It would seem that the main sort of work when people think of someone going out and doing something in the world, when he did that, he said that was a scaffolding for an inner kind of work. But it would seem that up to that, really up to the point of the universal message being released, it looks to most observers that the work was done, because after that everything is just sort of a scaling down. But he said that he still had this universal work. Now again, is this symbolic? Was the work just maintaining the connection because he didn't want to let down people who were counting on him? He told his Mandali he was going to be alive for 90 years, especially Mera. He was extremely disappointed when he everybody was disappointed when he dropped the body, but particularly they were counting, particularly Mera was counting on this idea that he was going to live to be 90. And as Adi says that, and then he says, but he gave us a slip. So he gave him a slip and dropped the body. And so was his universal work simply, and he certainly describes it as in a sense of having to maintain a connection with the world. And if not, then what was the work that he did in that period? Anybody's guess as good as mine. Although he did continue contacting people. He did finish certainly the discourses and other sort of concrete works were put in motion. He worked with different people, which I'll get to in a second. But everything that we're looking at now is is the culmination of this initial experience that he had with Baba John. So, as I say, he did continue to meet with people. He met with Indian center workers and Westerners. There's a particularly striking, during this time in the 60s, I think it was 66, when he was really not in good health. He's meeting with the Pune workers, and they have a very animated conversation. People are talking and kind of move. But when Mayor Baba talked, he did not talk. He's very active with his hands, gesturing and doing all this stuff like this. And for someone in his health, that was quite a lot of activity, quite a lot of, you can see he's sweating, but he's really, he's dynamically engaged in this stuff. So this was clearly, this kind of work, whatever he was doing with those people, was very important to him, and he was very, very deeply engaged in it. And likewise, Bill LePage reports the same thing. Mayor Baba asked him to come and stay for 2 weeks at Merazad and work on, clearly his intention was that Bill would work with Baba on what the future of Avatar's abode was going to be, what the future of his publication work in Australia, and all those kind of things. Likewise, Don Stevens visited several times, many times. There were a lot of people who were, I think most of them, I think, were both Sufis and also in the oil business. I know Marvin Campen, who we knew from Nashville for many years, and Don, and there's Joseph Harb, and there's others who had, for one reason or another, traveled a lot and were given permission to just, and there's some people that I can't even remember their names, but they're just kind of obscure people who were out there, obscure to me anyways, who were out there but had this license to, whenever they were traveling for their business purposes, they could go to Merazad and visit. Even during these intense seclusions, they would be able to come and stay with him, and let him know they're coming, and then he could say. Marvin was one, Don Stevens is another, and Don, of course, wasn't just random, because he would be called to work on various publishing projects. There were a number of things, but the main one was the 6th edition of the Discourses, which they completed in 1967. And additionally, there were many darshan programs, mostly moderately sized, but there were a couple that had several thousand, and of course the biggest one being the East-West gathering held in 1962. Even during the East-West gathering, when devotees from Europe, the US, India, and other places around the world gathered to be with Mayor Baba, many for the last time, many of the attendees noticed, and I've heard many of the longtime people, Elizabeth and Darwin and other people, saying that, and the people who'd been with him in the 30s, that the intimacy that they had once enjoyed had now changed. It wasn't that he didn't love them, but the familiarity and the ability to have a lot of private time with him became less and less. And this would be, this East-West gathering was for many, 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 except for these few who had this license to come and go, for many, many people this was the last time that they would see Mayor Baba, many people in the West, that is. A promised gathering that was to have been held in December of 1965 was later postponed for those in the West. It was held, but only Indian lovers could come, and not for the general public, just for people who were committed to Mayor Baba. But the Westerners were not. A couple of Westerners did manage to slip through, but most did not. At last, this 65 gathering that was promised was delayed and delayed and delayed until it was then it was promised to be held in 1969. Of course, that was without Mayor Baba present, and that's a story we'll talk about next week. So another important piece of work that Mayor Baba was involved in during this period was young people and drugs. And the first contact, well, this is a young, you might not know what to look at, this is a young Alan Cohen here. He was here 6 months ago, something like that, yeah.
Last Christmas.
Christmas, okay.
Yeah.
So, another important piece of work that Mayor Baba did during the last decade of his life was to warn young people about LSD and other recreational drugs that many thought would help them to advance spiritually. And this 64 is very early for that, so it's kind of amazing that so quickly, almost as soon as this trend of taking LSD particularly blossomed, and that it was connected with spirituality. Almost immediately, he was contacted. It was kind of it wasn't, Alan didn't actually reach out to contact Mayor Baba, but he had discovered, he'd heard Darwin Shaw talk, and I think that was at the Woodstock talk, is that right? Yeah. So he'd heard Darwin Shaw talk in Woodstock, New York. Tom Riley, a local person who was very active and met Mayor Baba in '58 and in '62, had put together a meeting in Woodstock, and Timothy Leary and Alan Cohen had gone.
And Ramdas was there too.
Yeah, that's right. At that time, Alfred, yeah.
And they wrote a letter to Mayor Baba about drugs. They were the first. I never got clear whether it was one letter they both contributed to, or they both wrote separate letters. But they were the ones who got the ball rolling. They asked Mayor Baba, where does this stuff fit into the spiritual panorama?
Well, that you may be, you're usually right, Ira. So I'm not going to argue with you. But what I was just reading said that Alan had written first to, and it may have been something. But anyways, he had written, whether it was first or not, he had written to Kitty Davy.
That was after.
Okay, but Kitty, the way it's described in Lord Mayor, Kitty had forwarded the letter to Mayor Baba and then replied.
Yeah, that's a separate letter. But
Okay.
Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary, who were his teachers, they wrote the original letter to Mayor Baba and said, we don't know where this stuff is going. You're an expert in consciousness. What do you take this stuff to be? That's what got the whole thing rolling in the West about psychedelics. Because the original statements that fit into God and Pill came from that letter. Bob's response to that letter from Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary.
Alrighty, I'll do
Check
some
it,
more
you'll
work.
see.
Yeah, I'm sure, Ira, I'm not going to argue with you. You're usually right. So,
Quick question about this. So I
yeah.
had never heard of this meeting in Woodstock. When did that occur?
well, it would have been in '63. It probably was in '64.
64,
Yeah.
And Woodstock itself was in '69, wasn't it? The
Yes.
big festival?
Well, no, but no. The Woodstock Festival was not in Woodstock, but it was held in 1969. Yeah.
It was called that. Okay.
Yeah.
But this meeting was in '63 or '64?
64. Yeah. So anyway, and after that, however it happened, Alan Cohen wrote this letter to Baba, and here's things that he wrote back to Alan. This is excerpts from his letter to Alan Cohen. So, all so-called spiritual experiences generated by taking mind-changing drugs are superficial and add enormously to one's addiction to the deceptions of illusion, which is but the shadow of reality. Illusion is the shadow of reality, and drugs just increase your addiction to that shadow. The experience of a semblance of freedom that these drugs may temporarily give to one is in actuality a millstone round the aspirant's neck in his efforts toward emancipation from the rounds of birth and death. It is good to know that there are drugs that alleviate human suffering. It is better to have a knowledge of a specific drug for a particular ailment, and it is best to put to use the specific drug for the benefit of a human body. But there is no drug that can promote the aspirant's progress or ever alleviate the sufferings of separation from his beloved God. Love is the only propeller and the only remedy. The aspirant should love God with all his heart until he forgets himself and recognizes his beloved God in himself and others. So the interesting thing is that, and this doesn't seem to really be an issue these days. I don't know anybody who, well, I won't say that. There's still people who are very interested in shamanism, and some South American,
big now.
yeah, some South American shamans still use psilocybin and all that, and they do connect drugs in that sense with spirituality. But in the popular sense, there's big kind of New Age interest in that. But in the general public, that's not, I should say the masses, that's not as big a thing. It's kind of New Agey, hippie-ish, New Age seekers still, usually when they're into that, they do it through someone who they think is a shaman or an elder who's going to take them through the path. And
Leary, in some ways, I think, was responsible for that, for people back then making a connection between spirituality and drugs, partly because the Tibetan Evans Wentz, you know,
Mhm.
had translated the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and that became, you know, that was a thing. And it occurred to Leary that the states of consciousness described in that book, as
Mhm, right.
people go through after death, were very similar to the states of consciousness that he had observed in people and himself on LSD.
Mhm.
And so that made him kind of go, and his book, The Psychedelic Experience, was a kind of was sort of based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So there was a lot of buzz in like meditation circles and spiritual circles that, you know, this was about, might be.
Yeah, they would have been better off if they'd gotten into Carl Jung rather than getting into drugs, but
Yeah, I'm just
because the
saying,
archetypal
you
patterns
know,
that.
That's.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
I was
Yes.
there in 1964 hearing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife Zoe speaking, for those of you at home, and she was roommates or friends with Susan Leary, Tim Leary's daughter, and they spent a lot of time together. And she would go to Millbrook where they were doing all this. They had like little container places where they would do LSD and all that kind of
Well,
stuff.
I was not doing that at Millbrook.
No, I know you weren't, but-
Before I even met Susan, I was at an ashram in New York,
Mhm, right.
where there was a contingent, and LSD was still legal then,
Mhm.
and there was a certain element in the ashram of people who were very interested in the spiritual uses of psychedelic drugs, and I can remember them asking the teacher there, and Guruji, to his credit, at least at that time, said, no, that doesn't work, you know, it's meditation.
Yeah, that's still young, precocious Zoe. Got some mail order psilocybin that she shared with her friends at school.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's a whole other talk, which we'll get on another occasion. And she really should do it. Zoe has some wonderful stories about those things. However, there's all that history which coincides. It's amazing how quickly, in 1964, that coincided with Mayor Baba, and Mayor Baba got news of this. Point being that a lot of the God and the pill stuff, although, if and when we encounter people who are into this shamanic processing and going on guided shamanic journeys and all that, it would be good to share God and the pill that most certainly people doing ecstasy and doing heroin and doing OxyContin and all that stuff are not looking for God. Usually they're just trying to get high. So it's a very different vibe. It's important, though, to putting in context that this is why Baba got brought into it by Leary and others, is that he was an expert, and he was certainly an expert in that, and said, no, it's as we just heard. And
the most amazing thing about this whole chapter is that Mayor Baba actually organized his young helpers, Alan Cohn, and Gary Brilliant was one, and different from the one.
Rick Chapman, too, yeah.
Rick Chapman and Dreyfus, and a few others that aren't as well known, and actually told them to go outside lecture halls where Timothy Leary was giving lectures about tune in, turn out, drop out, and then they would give out the pamphlets of God and the Pill to everyone who came out of the lecture. And this went on for a while. As far as I know, it's unprecedented. Baba never did what appeared to be a kind of political activity like that.
Yeah.
We directed people to actually hand out pamphlets outside of another person's lecture. It's unique.
It
Most
is.
people don't even know that happened. But it was Baba orchestrated it. And he said the most important work for God in that period was the anti-psychedelic work. That was the most important work that anyone could do for God, which is absolutely mind-blowing when you think about what that means. I don't know. But it's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing, yeah. And so and I don't have any material on Rick, but he should be mentioned. I'm going to say a little bit about Robert and his visit with Baba, and that as you can see, it's already so kind of interesting. We take a lot of time with that, so I didn't bring in Rick, but Rick is a very important catalyst in all this as well. And so the next one is our friend. It's kind of a blurry picture, but Robert Dreyfus. Many of us know Robert also from years ago. So another young devotee, 22-year-old Robert Dreyfus, had learned about Mayor Baba through his friend Alan Cohen, and he decided to attend the planned, many things happened between finding out about Baba and deciding to go, but he heard about this darshan that was planned for 65 in Pune. And he left on September 1st, 1965, hitchhiked across Europe and Asia, arriving on actually he arrived on November 15th, he arrived at Baba's home in Marizad on the 16th. But he arrived only to learn upon arrival that the darshan had been canceled 3 days after he had left the U.S. So he left on the 1st. The 4th, Baba canceled it, but he was already in Europe. No one knew how to get in touch with him. He wasn't writing. There was no email in those days. So, through an interesting series of events, Robert did receive an opportunity to meet Meher Baba. He had him, everybody kept saying, no, 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 but we should go and talk to Audie. So we went and talked to Audie, and then Audie said, well, no, 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 but he called, I don't know if he called up, or somehow the Mondeley wanted to meet this guy who'd come 12,000 miles and I think they also must have known it's such a good story that Baba would be really intrigued and would want to meet him. But so they said, why don't you, the Mondeley want to meet you, so go with this guy. He took a scooter out to Marizad. The scooter broke down twice on the way getting to Marizad. And he gets to Marizad, and he talks for a couple minutes to Erich, and Erich found it compelling enough. He said, well, just wait here a minute, and he went and disappeared, and then he came back and said, Baba is very interested in meeting you. He wants you to sleep the night in the blue bus. So he spent the night in the blue bus. And then he talked to Erich some more, and Erich went off again. And then he said, okay, Baba wants to meet you. And so he went into Baba's bedroom, and he describes this really very much like the description that Tom Riley gives of his meeting of Meher Baba in the Lagoon cabin, but just being completely overwhelmed by Meher Baba's presence and light and bursting into tears and just completely overwhelmed. And then he went and slept it off in the blue bus. And he got up in the morning and Baba spent a half hour with him. And here's some excerpts from that conversation, which was really, I really encourage you to go into, and by the way, just as an aside also, I was in doing research for this, came across Tom Riley's story from 1958, which he wrote up for Lord Maher. That's in there, very beautiful, and Roberts is just fascinating. So there's a lot of good, as you know, in there, but particularly on this topic. So Baba asked Robert if many young people in America were taking drugs such as LSD. Robert said yes, and Baba said, tell those that are, that if drugs could make one realize God, then God is not worthy of being God. Baba told Robert imperatively to discontinue taking drugs and to tell others not to take them. No drugs, he gestured very sternly several times. Baba amplified this by stating at length, many people in India smoke hashish and ganja. They see colors and forms and lights. It makes them elated, but this elation is only temporary. It is a false experience. It gives only experience of illusion. It heightens illusion and serves as simply another veil over reality, taking one farther away from it. Read God Speaks again and again until you feel it singing in your veins. And Robert, when he would describe this, he said, Baba went like this. He said, when you see it, until you feel it singing in your veins. Tell those who indulge in these drugs, LSD, marijuana, and other types, that it is harmful physically, mentally, and spiritually, and that they should stop the taking of these drugs. Your duty is to tell them, regardless of whether they accept what you say, or if they ridicule or humiliate you, to boldly and bravely face these things. Leave the results to me. I will help you in my work. Baba asked Robert, what work were you doing before you came to India? Robert said that he had been working in a mental hospital. Baba smiled and continued, very good. When you go back to the United States, I want you to go back to the hospital, to that ward, and I will work through you with the patients. I want you to return to the hospital to serve the patients and give them my love. I will help you bring my love to them. I will work through you with them. And remember to dedicate all situations, good or bad, at my feet. You are to bring my message to those ensnared in the drug net of illusion, that they should abstain, that the drugs will bring more harm than good. I send my love to them. So that was a big period. As I said, there are other people involved. They did, and throughout Lord Maher, you'll see different stories about Baba's very involved. Rick particularly would whenever they did one of these things, they were on the Joe Pine show, and he wrote to Bob and told him all the details, and Bob would then, I think he was talking to Don Stevens, and Bob was explaining to Don Stevens they just didn't want a radio show, and so happy that they're doing this good work. So Bob he wasn't just a passive, as you were saying, I didn't know about that story, but he was not just a passive observer of this. He was very concerned about it and very actively involved in making sure that that there's this counter narrative to the narrative that, oh, you're going to find God through these drugs. So, this is the ongoing process that he's been doing. He sees them, he sees other people. He continued to restrict his lovers and devotees from contacting him due to his increasing focus on what he called his universal work. His health continued to deteriorate. Erich Jeswala has reported that during the period that he was doing what he called his universal work, he would sit for hours pounding his thigh until the flesh of his thigh was as hard as a board. And Erich said literally he would pound it himself, and it would be just as hard as a tabletop. Baba explained to him that this activity of pounding his thigh was necessary for him when doing his universal work. He said that it helped him maintain his link with the gross world. Otherwise, he said, he would drop his body. Finally, on the evening of July 30th, 1968, Meher Baba said, "My work is done. It is completed 100% to my satisfaction. The result of this work will also be 100% and will manifest from the end of September." He also said, "How I kept it going over the last stretch to its completion, I alone know. You cannot have a seed of an idea how crushing the pressure was, for it is beyond human understanding. On the final day, my body felt as though it had been through a wringer." And he, needless to say, he had a lot more to say about that. So that's, again, we've gotten now, we've gone through Baba's entire life. He said from the very beginning that he had this spiritual work. I don't know if he originally called it, he would call it my work in the early years. My work is important. I have to do my work. I'm doing this for my work. You don't understand, that kind of thing. Then, as he got more and more public about his role, what he called his role as the avatar, he's called it his universal work. Naturally, as an avatar would have a universal work. And even the way he describes in discourses in other places that there are sadgurus, they have worked with certain people. The avatar's work is universal. So naturally, as he shifted into a public role as avatar, one would assume, from the point of view of his narrative, that he was always doing universal work, but he did not call it that until later. But, boom, all of a sudden he says it's done. It's completed. Now, one could say, was this all of his work was complete? All of the universal work was done? I don't know. It seems obvious that that's what he's talking about, but he's not, he's never really precise about these things. But you'll notice there, all throughout, and before this even, there are all of these sort of breadcrumb trails that Meher Baba is leaving, and apparently the only one who really picked them up was Erich. That Erich said that he really had a strong feeling that Meher Baba was going to drop his body before he actually did, and before it happened. And he would say this to people, and that's crazy. Baba said he'll be 90, he'll be fine, he'll bounce back. What are you talking about? He's planning this big darshan program. How could he? It's good. It's never happened. So this is an excerpt on this period from the book The Beloved, published by Narshan Ansar, and I've edited some things out and changed some things, but it's basically that's what we're talking about. So in response to persistent queries of his lovers, Baba decided to give darshan from April 10 to June 10, 1969 in Pune. Now this is the oft put off darshan. He said there's going to be a darshan, the Westerners can come, and he kept saying no, 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 and then finally he says, okay. Baba told them, "No doubt, you people and my lovers everywhere have been wondering why, when my period of intense work in seclusion is finished," and we're talking about now is later anyways, into the fall of 1968, his work is completely done, so let's go. People want to see him. They've been in strict seclusion. So he says, "You've been wondering why, when my period of intense work in seclusion has finished, I have still not allowed my lovers to see me. The strain of that 18 months work was tremendous. I used to sit alone in my room for some hours each day while complete silence was imposed on the Mondley, and no one of them was permitted to enter the room during those hours every day. The strain was not in the work itself, although I was working on all planes of consciousness, but the strain was in keeping my link with the gross plane. And this is what I was just saying about the pounding of the thigh. To keep this link, I had to continuously hammer my right thigh with my fist. Now, although my health is good, and I would like to fulfill immediately the longing of my lovers to come to me, many to see me for the first time, it will yet take some time for all traces of the strain to disappear, and for me to be 100% fit to see them all. And so because of this, and for practical considerations also, I have decided to give my darshan only to my lovers, but not to the general public. So this is not going to be open the doors and anybody who wants to come can come in. You have to have made arrangements ahead of time, basically have an invitation, and then you'll be allowed into the darshan. This is the time for my lovers, he says. The time for the world's crowds to come to me will be when I break my silence and manifest my divinity. Later he remarked, I have been saying the time is near. It is fast approaching. It is close at hand. Today I say the time has come. Remember this. In the latter half of January, Meher Baba's health began deteriorating. His physical suffering and pain had become more and more evident. On the morning of January 30th, in the midst of severe spasms, he said, my time has come. In the early hours of Friday, January 31st, 1969, Baba instructed Alaba to bring from the Mondley Hall a board on which 3 couplets of the poet Hafiz were written. And we're all familiar with these. Befitting a fortunate slave. These are from different ghazals, but he had drawn them out and much earlier had people write them on the board. Had Alaba, I should say, most likely, because they were in Persian and Alaba was an Irani. So, first couplet, befitting a fortunate slave, carry out every command of the master without any question of why and what. About what you hear from the master, never say it is wrong, because, my dear, the fault lies in your own incapacity to understand him. Now, these were quotes that he had said over and over again, pointed to, had them written out. They were already written out. But this is 10 a.m. on January 31st, 1969. He passed away at, there seemed to be an event that no one's quite sure, it was sometime between 12 noon and 12:15. So this is 2 hours before he drops the body. He has Alaba read these out in Persian. This is the second one. The third one, I am the slave of the master who has released me from ignorance. Whatever my master does is of the highest benefit to all concerned. Now, there's 2 things that I find remarkable. There's many things, but I have 2 things just of an empirical nature that I find really remarkable about these last hours of Meher Baba's death. Now, this is the first one where he has these read out. This is clearly a message to all of his lovers, all of his followers, but particularly to his closest disciples who were right there with him. And they can't believe what's going on. Erich has a pretty strong sense of what's going on. Now, he reads out these couplets. Not everybody is present, but Oliver reads them out. And after the couplets were read out in Persian, Meher Baba bowed his hands and gestured in respect. Huda Hafiz. Now, it's like the man is dying and he's making a joke. It's misinterpreted, it's mistranslated in Lord Mayhere, where it says something about go with God. And it is, people do say that, they say go with God. What it means literally is remember God, but he's saying remember Hafiz. And he's saying Huda Hafiz, so it's an expression, but he's just read out Hafiz, so there's like a double entendre there, where he's saying goodbye Hafiz, he's saying goodbye to the Mondley, because this is what you say when you say goodbye, and he's also making a respectful statement about Hafiz, and so there's all these multiple, just as Hafiz has multiple meanings, he's making this sort of multiple meaning joke on his deathbed. So this is how I interpret this, and I find it quite fascinating, because it's so colloquially Persian and so kind of referential to Hoff on multiple levels, which is what Hoff is famous for. So that is just one amazing thing. And the other amazing thing, and I've mentioned this before in these talks, it was a film that it was shown on Amartithi, and in it, Erich is just describing, with no particular reference to what I'm going to reference, he's just describing that Meher Baba is going through his last he's describing what happened in the last moments with his master. And he is trying to do things, go here's there, running around, everybody's a little bit frantic because Baba's having these very intense spasms, and he stops, and all of a sudden he has a massive spasm, and he said he had the spasm, and Erich just goes like this. And he says, and that was done. But what he's saying, without even dwelling, he kind of moves on to then I gave him up.
That was 3 days before this happened. That happened on the 28th.
No, that one that he's describing, he describes on that, I know about the video. He's talking about the video where he's, on the video, he's describing what happened the moment Meher Baba passed away. And he's describing that that's what he saw. He doesn't dwell on that. I'm just picking out this thing. He's just kind of mimicking what Meher Baba did. And then he said, and then I performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on him. I tried to revive him, and Goher's running around, everybody's weeping, and it just eventually he collapsed in exhaustion. But the point is, here's a human being, regardless of how you take Meher Baba, who had such a commitment to keeping his silence, that at his very last gesture on earth as a human being is to slam his hand over his mouth so that in the death throes he does not utter a sound. To me, this is just astonishing. So that brings us to the end of, as he said, his time had come, his work is done. These 9 talks up to here covers, well, actually 8, because the first one was kind of contextual, how I was going to talk about him. So this brings us through that introductory talk as kind of bookends. The introductory talk, the 8 talks takes us through, obviously left out lots and lots and lots of details about Meher Baba's life. Next week, I will try to say a little bit about the immediate aftermath, which includes what is called the Great Darshan, or the Last Darshan, or the Darshan program that Meher Baba put into motion, and that all the Mandali felt that he intended people to come, and it began this really the phase of where we are now. It was the beginning point of the Baba lovers who bow down to chairs, and the people who are followers of Meher Baba but have never met him, and it was a way for those people to process, and also a way to recognize it's a fulfillment. I mentioned this all started out with the internal links business, because it's a fulfillment of what Meher Baba said about establishing internal links, and now we see some, this would have been 54 or 15 years later, where now it's incumbent upon, maybe they didn't get it in 1954, but now it's incumbent upon everyone to develop those internal links and be linked to him completely. Or there are also those who, as far as they could see, he didn't break the silence. They were just shattered by this, and a lot of people left him after that event. So there's all that, and the development of movements, what happened with the Meher Center, what happens with the Sufis, all that, and we'll talk about that next week. I've left out lots of things. I'm interested if there's any thoughts, feedback, questions, criticisms. How did I know that you would have something to contribute?
I have one question this time. And I'd like to hear from you, and also hear from Vinod on this question. My initial training as a Meher Baba person was all the stuff that Baba said about ask anything you want from the bottom of your heart, and it will come to you. But my chosen ones are those who ask only for my love. And I took that very much to heart in my young years with Bob as a young person, from 16 on. And for years and years, that I understood that was it. Focus on that. I mean, to the point that I understood what Bob was saying at that point in my life, as even if your parent were dying, don't necessarily pray for that. Don't ask Bob to save the life of your parents. Only ask for his love. Accept whatever happens in the course of your life. And then I was shocked when I went to India for the first time, even though I had a ticket for the last darshan, I didn't get to go to 74. And I got to discover some of what you were saying earlier, that there were gobs of people, well, not a huge amount, but whose whole lives are so embroiled with constant correspondence to Mayor Bob, including my friend Irwin and Eddie Luck and others. And
their father.
Yeah, and they practically didn't take a shit until they got permission from Mayor Bob. I'm exaggerating, but
I hope so, yeah.
yeah, but almost. I never have been able to fully reconcile this continuity between that thrust that Bob emphasized, which is, things of the world are not terribly important. Don't really give it that much attention. Take God more seriously and the world less seriously. And those of you in India, particularly, who absolutely doted on every issue. And as you said, Bob would be upset if people didn't do that. So how do you reconcile that? I have never been able to fully reconcile it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem reconciling it. I'll leave it to Vinod and others to respond. But clearly, I mean, first of all, like I said, his main training was this development of affectional bonds. And the other thing is, he's talking about, see, it's this distinction, I think what you're talking about is this distinction between Merwan, who we were introduced to in the first several lectures, Merwan, and his, what he claims is his experience of being Avatar. In other words, it's that whole Nicene Creed business of God being both God and man. Merwan, and I think there's also two aspects of that, but as Merwan, as this human Irani man who grew up and had to somehow integrate this phenomenal experience, he still loves people and wants to, knows he can help people, wants to have that human connectedness with them. And that's clearly a very healthy spiritual thing. It's not only a teaching tool, it's also an actual, he actually was human. Just because God realized an avatar or whatever, doesn't mean, I mean, even in the religious narrative aspect of it, doesn't mean he never stopped being human. So he had very human connections with Vinod and with other people who, and he wanted them to know that they could count on him, just as anybody would want to be able to count on a friend. So that's my response to it, is that, yeah, I mean, in the ultimate sense, and so there's that. Then there's also, let's accept the religious narrative and say that he's the avatar and he's God in human form. That level of involvement with him can only be beneficial after he's dropped the body. I mean, just even on a mechanical level,
And do you feel that the ultimate statement of the chosen ones were those who choose only my love, that is the ultimate undergirding, in spite of whatever happened in terms of one's daily life with Bob, what didn't happen, that's what we're left with. And that's what Bob always stressed, was I'm not the one to give, but the one to take, and therefore focus only on my divine love, ask only for that. Vinod, what's your answer?
No, he said that, but he said if you desperately ask for some worldly thing, I'll give you also that. But if you're desperate, if you're after me, then I give you that, but then you have to bear the consequences of that. No, I remember when this.
And Adi used to say also, but if you can ask him, but ask him as a child would ask. Don't be guileless.
Leave it to me whether I give it to you. But if you desperately keep on asking me, if you force me to fulfill your desires, I will do that. But then you will have to bear the consequences if it is not good for you, whatever happens.
So what have you seen in your life as an Indian Baba lover, with all the Baba people that you obviously know in India? What have you seen in a larger scope in terms of how it's played out over the years and continues to play out? About the particular question I'm asking, in terms of the tension between choose only my love and at the same time ask me for whatever you want, or communicate, that your child has a cold today, whatever that is. How do you integrate that now in your life?
Now, after no, but slowly he changed us internally, and our desires reduced, and we wanted to seek his love only. That didn't seem important to us, other worldly things. Slowly he transformed us from inside, which he's still doing.
So he's weaning you away from that.
He's weaning you away.
Yeah.
So and that reminds me of another aspect of what I was saying. That to be that enmeshed, you could say, with Merwan, with this man, Meher Baba, then when he the more enmeshed you are, the more is taken away when he drops the body.
Yes.
So that's the consequence
Yes.
that you experience.
And we have seen he takes away material things slowly from us. And our longing also for the material things he takes away. So that our attention is only concentrated on him. That he works inwardly on everybody, I feel. Because that is his mission, to awaken us to the reality. He works with everyone according to their stages where they are.
That's right.
And in their own time. Not, he doesn't work suddenly on them, very slowly. And he makes them ready so that they themselves give up and seek him only.
Well, that's what Shirdi Sai Baba said. He said that my method is I give my devotees, my lovers, what they want, so that after a while they'll
What they
want my
need.
love.
And
Yeah.
he said, I'll give you what you need, not what you want, because
Right.
your wants are unlimited.
But Sai Baba was more generous in that sense. He apparently was...
Yeah, but he also took every nickel you had.
Yeah, that's
Every
true
way
too. But anyway, there was a
That was
different,
symbolic, I think.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
different style between Sai Baba and Meher Baba.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so much so
very
that I
similar.
remember when I was at Shirdi, the first time I went there, I figured, well, he's my spiritual grandfather. He's all, all of us. So I said, well, Mayor Baba's not giving me a wife. I'm going to ask Shirdi Sai Baba because he won't refuse me. So I said, Shirdi Sai Baba, your son, Mayor Baba, is rather stingy with me about finding me a wife. Would you do it for me? I don't think Bob would mind. It's up to you two guys to work it out. But I'm asking you to find me a wife. And that was I'm still not married. But anyway, I tried.
There's so many things I could say about that. I'm just going to let it go. But yeah, so there, and imagine, just imagine, as I was saying, the more enmeshed you are, the more, imagine Mara, Mani, Erich, Adi. I mean, I was saying earlier that this method of taking away, one of the clearest examples, and this is not my idea, this is what Adi himself said, was that he found, and I mentioned some of this today when I was talking, but he found little by little, when he was 18 years old, Meher Baba came to his sick bed, fed him, took care of him. When he took him to Mausoleum, he fed him with his own hands. Adi said, I just felt like I was the most important Mandali. I mean, Baba feeds me with his own hands, he takes all this care with me. How important must I be, And then little by little, he was separated. And then in the 60s, when, as I was saying, this period when he's separating from people, he began to keep Adi at arm's length, and more and more and more and more. And Adi said he would come back from a trip to Marizad and just go into his bathroom and weep and weep and weep and weep and weep and just feel so heartsick because he loved Baba, he wanted to be with him, he'd been so close for so long, and he would just be very upset and he'd be very distraught about it. But he said when Baba finally dropped the body, he'd already, I'm using my words now, but he'd already been through the grief process. He'd already kind of been through the loss of Baba, and so he was, when all the other Mandali were just really couldn't do anything, he was sending telegrams, he was working, he was able to keep going because Baba had already put him through the grief process. He'd already, so Adi said it was like a blessing in disguise. And it seems that a lot of what he was doing over that last 15 years was little by little withdrawing, and helping people to experience that. And clearly, and there's something was going on with his physical suffering that came on from the accidents, and that, I mean, he certainly wasn't faking the suffering, and he really was doing something and needed the space that he gave himself, but it also performed the function of helping people to cope better when he did drop the body. And it seems also this last darshan is really quite amazingly symbolic and representative, because you can read some of the conditions for it, and all of those things have carried on right up to this day. Not all of them, but many of them carried into the way that pilgrimage is carried out going to Mehrabad. Right up to the point of being used to experiencing his presence when he's not present, and just the various protocols that people are asked to follow.
That established a template.
Exactly, yeah, and he took care of it, right? Because even after that, the Mandali people, they didn't think anybody was going to be coming. They were kind of amazed that people came. As Erich said, on the day of the gathering, you kept your appointment with God, and people did that, but they didn't expect people to keep coming back. They were shocked when people kept coming back, and now, of course, there's they've kind of reached a climax with the Westerners because a lot of people came back so much because they loved the Mandalay and they wanted to be with them. But now there's so many Indians coming that there's still a huge pilgrimage site functioning there now, even though at the time they couldn't imagine anybody was going to come. So, anybody else? Any other questions, thoughts?
So Jimmy, one thing I've heard, Bhau had revealed few years before he died that Baba physically broke his silence when he was about to drop his body.
Mhm.
He said few words, yaad rakh or something in Hindi. What do you think about it?
When I think about it, I was there actually. Zoe and I, we had just come back from, just arrived at Mehrabad, and Bao was giving a talk, and he came out with us, and I was like, what?
After so many years he revealed that.
Yeah. No, so here's a story that I mean, first of all, I don't buy it for a second. I think Bao was doing that for a reason, and everybody is absolutely. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who adore Bao and think that this is what happened. I don't think that happened. I think Bao, here's why. Because we heard, very soon after that we heard, that some Rajneesh guy had come and visited Bao in the hospital. And it was just a couple weeks before this event. And he had said that Rajneesh had told all of his followers, and he believed it, that Meher Baba had tried to break his silence, but he was unable to because he had not spoken for so many years. So I feel that Bao wanted to counter that narrative and just
tell people that many people thought that because Baba had kept silence for so many years, he was not able to speak.
Exactly.
To prove that he was able to speak and he kept the silence.
So I think that's what I think Bao wanted to do that. I don't think, like I said, just this story with Erich, should Baba do it? Why would he do that?
But he admitted it before he died. In fact, it's in the Globe magazine that he was lying.
He
made
did?
up the whole story. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh yes. Check it out.
Well,
Bao, about 6 months before he died, he admitted the whole thing was a fabrication. That Baba never spoke to him.
Well, and I really felt bad for Erich and the other modeling, because if someone told Erich and Erich said, "Oh, he said that."
Erich was there.
So that's I didn't even know about it. I'd like to see that article. I didn't know about it.
I don't know the date of it, but
I never.
The months right before his death, and you'll find it.
Even the way Bao talked, like I said, we were there in the room when he was giving it. He said, I did not remember. Now I remember. This is what it was. Just there was no. I mean, it was just. I just love Bao to death, but I did not believe that. And I'm sure he did it out of love for Bob. And that's my take. I can be completely wrong.
When in his final letter, he said he did it because he was lonely. That's what he said.
Bao said that?
Yes, he was lonely for Baba, and so to help create the symbolic illusion of Baba still being there, he told this lie to everyone that Baba had actually spoken when he hadn't. That's what he says.
That's what he said. Well, I do know. I mean, it's a fact that I heard a story that only a couple weeks before, this Rajneesh person, or Osho person, if you prefer, had said to Bao that, well, we know that he tried, but he couldn't break his silence. That's why he never broke his silence. Yeah, that's what this. I forget where I heard that story, but that was the story that I heard. And then it made sense to me that Bao would do anything to defend Baba, and I think he told that lie to defend Baba. That's what I think. But I don't know. That's my.
What about Eric saying that he heard Baba humming or something?
Oh no, a lot of people have heard that.
That was on the 28th, though. On the 28th, it's also in the Globe magazine. Eric and Francis Brabazon were in the room alone with Baba 3 days before Baba's passing, and Baba spoke in Om, screaming and holding his hand, and Eric said clearly he was using his vocal cords. So many of us, or some of us, believe Meher Baba absolutely spoke the word on the 28th of January 69, because Eric said it, he did. And Francis was already dead, so couldn't comment on it. But one thing I'll tell you was very interesting, that Francis, Baba was in the late 50s, early 60s, forever pestering the Mandalay. I'm really going to break my silence. This is not just a symbolic thing. It's not aesthetic symbolism. What do you do? He didn't say that, whatever, just teasing him. But whatever he said, and they were tired of it. And so one day Francis challenged him. He said, Meher Baba, you mean I'm actually going to hear you speak that word with these very ears? And Meher Baba shot right back at him with those very gross ears, Francis. And people knew that you had to be like an attorney with Baba. So Francis said, in his very lifetime, Mayor Baba, he said, I promise you, Francis, you will hear me speak with those very gross ears in his very lifetime. A direct promise from Mayor Baba. And one of the only two people who heard Baba speak the word physically was Francis. He said, I promise you, in this very life, you will hear with those very gross ears. This is also another interesting story, because Baba promised him directly, you will hear it before I die.
Only for him, it may be only for him.
Well, he heard it and Erich heard it. Both heard it.
What did Baba say?
He said a kind of screaming om, and he had his hand clasped on his mouth. It's in the May 1993 issue of Glow, if you check it out. It's in there. It was in 92, I think. May 1992. The whole article was written up. And even to the end of Erich's life, he always said, as far as I'm concerned, I heard Mayor Baba speak at that point. So, there's a growing number of people, including myself, who are absolutely convinced that Baba did not go to the grave with the tomb silent. He had already spoken 3 days earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about the manifestation? That's all no one knows. But the actual speaking of the word already happened.
Mm-hmm.
Only 2 people heard it.
Already?
What do you feel about that?
I have no idea. I mean, as I say, none of it
Check it out, May
changes.
1992.
Yeah, nothing, none of those contingencies, if Bao was right, if Erich, you are right, of all that, none of that changes
Right, the mystery of it all. Yeah.
what he did, or why. And Erich, there is a film of Erich doing this on the last, why would he do that? I don't know. I don't know any of it. There's so much about him I don't know. I do know, the only thing I know about Mayor Baba with great certainty is that he's my spiritual superior. He's superior in many other ways, but certainly spiritually he's superior to me. That I know. And so if he decided to do any of those things, all I can say is
But what if